There's a certain kind of moment that doesn't look like much from the outside. Someone pauses just for a second longer than usual. They take a breath, steady their voice, and then say, "I'm fine," and somehow everyone believes them. They always do. Because this person doesn't break down in public, they don't ask for help, they don't make things messy for anyone else. If anything, they're the one people go to when everything falls apart. And after a while, it becomes expected. People start assuming they can handle more, that they don't need checking in, that they're just built differently. But what most people don't notice is how much gets left unsaid in those small moments, how much gets carried quietly, without ever being named. And the truth is, society has a way of misunderstanding people like this. They get labeled as strong, like it's something simple, like it's just a personality trait, something admirable even. But that label can be misleading. Because what looks like strength on the outside is often something much more complex underneath. It's not just about resilience, it's not just about being capable. It's a pattern. And if you've always been the one holding everything together, there's a good chance there's more going on here than people realize. Psychology has a way of explaining this that feels almost uncomfortably accurate once you hear it. There's a concept sometimes referred to as emotional self-reliance, where someone learns, often very early on, that their needs don't get met in the same way as others. Not necessarily because no one cares, but because the environment around them subtly teaches them to manage things on their own. Over time, the brain adapts. The nervous system becomes less likely to signal outward distress, not because the distress isn't there, but because it's learned that expressing it doesn't change anything, or worse, it creates more problems. So instead, the system shifts. It prioritizes control, composure, stability. And from the outside, that looks like strength. But internally, it's more like a quiet negotiation, a constant balancing act between what felt and what's shown. Neuroscience backs this up in a way that makes it even clearer. When someone repeatedly suppresses emotional expression, especially in environments where vulnerability isn't safe or rewarded, the brain starts reinforcing those pathways. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for regulation and control, becomes highly active in managing emotional responses. Meanwhile, the signals from more emotional centers, like the amygdala, don't disappear, they just get redirected inward. So instead of being expressed, they're processed silently, handled alone, and eventually it stops feeling like a choice. It just becomes how you are. But this doesn't come out of nowhere. Most of the time, it's rooted in experience. Sometimes it's growing up in a space where emotions were unpredictable, or where being easy and low maintenance felt safer than being expressive. Sometimes it's being the one who had to step up early, the one who couldn't afford to fall apart because someone else already was. Or being the one people leaned on, again and again, until it felt natural to carry more than your share. And none of this happens in a dramatic, obvious way. It builds slowly. A moment where you realized no one was coming. A time when being strong got rewarded, even subtly. A pattern where your needs quietly took a back seat, not because they didn't matter, but because there just wasn't space for them. And over time, the identity forms. You become the one who can handle it. The one who doesn't need much. The one who's always okay. And it's important to say this clearly. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Being able to regulate yourself, to stay steady under pressure, to be reliable for others, those are real strengths. Not everyone can do that. And it's not better or worse than being more expressive or openly emotional. It's just a different way of adapting to the world. Different people are wired differently, shaped by different experiences. There's no single right way to be. But there is something that often goes unnoticed. And it's a bit of a paradox. The people who are seen as the strongest are often the ones least likely to feel supported. Not because others don't care, but because they've become so good at carrying things quietly that no one thinks to ask what they're carrying in the first place. And over time, that creates a kind of imbalance. You become the person everyone turns to, but not the person anyone thinks to check on. You listen but rarely get heard. You hold space but rarely take up any. And eventually, even when there is space, it can feel unfamiliar. Like you don't quite know how to step into it. There's also a hidden cost that comes with always being composed. When you spend years regulating your emotions internally, you can start to lose access to parts of yourself that were never meant to be handled alone. Not because they're gone, but because they've been pushed so far inward that they don't surface easily anymore. And that can create a quiet kind of disconnection. From others, sometimes, but also from yourself. You might find it hard to explain what you're feeling, even when you know something's there. Or you might feel like you have to translate everything into something manageable before it can exist. Like raw emotion isn't allowed to just be. And yet, there's another side to this that often gets overlooked. The same sensitivity that taught you to read situations, to anticipate needs, to stay steady under pressure, that's also a form of awareness. A depth, an ability to understand people in ways that aren't always obvious. It's why others feel safe around you. Why they trust you. Why they open up. That didn't come from nowhere. It came from paying attention, from adapting, from learning how to navigate complexity early on. So this isn't about taking that away. It's about recognizing it for what it actually is. Not just strength, but a system you built over time. One that made sense. One that worked. And maybe still does in a lot of ways. But also one that deserves to be seen more fully. Because being the strong one doesn't mean you were never affected. It doesn't mean you didn't feel things deeply. It doesn't mean you didn't need support. It just means you learn to operate without expecting it. And there's a difference. Once you see that clearly, something shifts. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quieter, more honest one. You start to understand that nothing about this makes you broken. It makes you adaptive. It makes you someone who found a way through, even when things weren't clear or easy. And that has value. Even the parts that feel heavy sometimes. Even the parts no one else sees. If any of this feels familiar, it's probably not random. There are usually more patterns like this, subtle ones that shape how you think, how you respond, how you move through the world without even realizing it. And once you start noticing them, you don't unsee them. If this kind of content speaks to you, you already know what to do.